Let's have a conversation about agriculture. This is Agri Talk in the Situation Room, promoting meaningful discourse on agriculture, agribusiness, and food security in the country. We will now be joined by Wilson Ngeno, who is the country manager at YARA, Kenya. Wilson, good morning and thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you very much and good morning to you.
So let's just start off with YARA Kenya. So YARA is this company that provides agricultural solutions, but just tell us more about YARA and what you do.
So thank you very much. YARA East Africa is a whole subsidiary of YARA International SA. Our specialty is fertilizer manufacture and distribution. We operate in over 105 countries across the globe, and our mission is to responsibly feed the world. So we are the pioneer in the fertilizer industry and looking at the crop solutions of feeding the crops. Mm-hmm. So that's our job actually, is feeding the crops to be able to deliver better yields for the farmers.
So feed the crops and then feed the people.
Absolutely. If you look at the perspective of food sufficiency, there is an angle around food, also malnutrition. So whatever you put on the crop, it actually ends up in our plate. So what we look at is what can we give to the crops so that eventually the diet that we have in our plate is able to be actually nutritious. It's not just any kind of food, but actually nutritious to be able to feed the growing population. And as you know, there's a scare that by 2050, our lands will not be able to produce enough food to feed the population. So this calls for a new way of thinking, and that's where innovations is not a subject to actually discuss. It's a subject to be done. We don't have a choice at this point of time.
William, if I can take you just a step back, you said 2050, looked at those studies, land will not be able to feed the population. What exactly does that mean? That in terms of the viability of the land, the soil is not good enough, weather patterns changing. What would be the reason? Not enough water. What would be the reasons why land would not be able to feed the population of the country?
Okay, so if we break it down, looking at the trends, so we start with the current trends. If you look at the current trends, for example, case in point, our country, Kenya, the cereal production, which is our staple food, is actually been declining. So it's going the opposite direction from the population growth. So this is where the worry starts to come in play. And the reason is we are using the same technologies that has been used since the agrarian revolution. So it means we need to change the way of working. First of all, the land availability, as we all know, issues around environmental protection. Land will not be, it will not multiply. So we still need to use the same piece of land to be able to feed even a higher number of people. So what it means is that we have to think around soil health. How do we make the current land that is actually arable be able to produce even 2-3 times more without impacting our environment? So this is the situation. The worrying trend is that, we have a situation where our yields are fast going down and the population is going up.
Sure.
So if we have creatively around 2050, that means we have to invest. Because if you look at the big economies that have moved in terms of the agricultural revolution, like Vietnam, Brazil, and even India, it's taken them almost 20-25 years to do this. So if we are looking at that scope, it means things have to change in that direction, actually like yesterday. This is the kind of situation. I'll give you an example. Maize production here in Kenya. Average farmers are doing less than 10 bags of maize. I will talk about maize because it's a common food all across. 10 bags per acre is not sustainable. The same farmers can adopt new technologies and be able to actually produce even 4 times that level.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of innovations that we actually are pushing in the private sector. And that's why also at YARA, we changed our mission a few years ago and we say we want to responsibly feed the world. We want to be part of that conversation around bringing new innovations. how can we contribute to this? And Kenya is in a very pivotal strategic position because we are in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the area where we still have, across the globe, the biggest potential for arable land. If you look at the other markets, I mean, Latin America, Europe, they've really gone and utilized most of their land. So we still have big land, and this is an opportunity in the sector also for the youth now who can invest into this kind of innovations to drive the opportunity around feeding the growing population.
Sure, I want to ask you about some of the specific innovations that you're talking about, because as we talk about some of these countries, India, Brazil, we're looking at things like people using very little soil to grow food. We have things like air plants now. We have using very little soil to grow things like vegetables. Are we talking along those lines to say that, okay, fine, land in arable quantity may not be available, but there are other options that we can use and then even grow that to a larger scale? Is that what we're looking at here?
Exactly. So I'll break it down into three kind of themes. So if we look at that segment, is we look at competence. We can look at the first stage, which is competence, and this is tied up with the innovation, because if we are to change the narrative around that productivity, we have to change the competence. So we have to look at how do we reach these smallholder farmers with better knowledge, because ideally, more than 70% of the production is actually done by smallholder farmers. So the competence is what needs to be changed, and this is what these other economies have been able to do over the years. So knowledge delivery systems into the farming communities is very important. How do we reach those farmers? We cannot, the extension system cannot be analog. It has to be digital. So I've seen a lot of investment around that side. And we are also doing something around digital extension system, where we need to empower the farmers at the palm of their hand. They are able to get all the kind of information about how to, what to, when to, and all that. And this translates into looking at what are the effects that affect them. Number one, weather forecast. We have a season of dry spell. We have a season of heavy rains. So how do we change that narrative in terms of competence in order to drive predictive agriculture rather than reactive? Because where we are now, we are on a reactive system. We deal with drought. The drought is here. We deal with it. Then floods. We deal with it at that time. So in terms of competence, we should be aiming at a predictive agricultural systems. And this is where the mature economies have been able to crack it quite well. And I think that's the narrative. We can break it down also here around the competence bit. There is another angle around capacity. And the capacity now, this is where now you come in with the issues about irrigation that you mentioned, because we have to drive the capacity in the agricultural sector. And this is where innovations also come into play. Capacity can be in terms of infrastructure. So you talk about the road, the rails, and the warehousing. You talk about the financial capacity, actually. If you look at other economies that are succeeding in agriculture, the lending rate of agriculture is not more than 8%. When you talk about Kenya, we are talking about 14+%. So that is the disparity around in terms of also building that capacity. So we need that innovation around digital tools, which some of it are in play now, and I will mention them as we go along, the specifics. But also the key element, the third element, is connectivity. The challenge is that we can grow actually food. Soil is just a medium. We can actually grow even food in hydroponics, which is water and all that. But when we talk about arable food, which is a staple for this country, we're still talking mainly maize and wheat, of course. But that can never be grown, of course, in hydroponics. We still need to use the soil because we're talking about the broad acre crops. But when we talk about the horticulture segment, this needs to move fast around other technologies like hydroponic, greenhouses, water harvesting technologies like dam liners and all that. So this is an area also that really can be a driver. So I would summarize it into three. There is competence, there is capacity, and there is connectivity. Because as long as that's 70% of the smallholder farmers who are producing our food are still not connected to service. They are not connected to markets. They're not connected to this. This is where the innovations need to address, and we are already working on some of those innovations around connectivity so that we address these three C's, which, if you trace back to the Green Revolution that happened in India some in the 1960s, will be able to address this. And I think we are in a very pivotal moment to be able to start this kind of switch into more innovative agriculture technologies.
Talking of innovation and something that you mentioned, I like that word, soil health. What percentage of this country consists of what we may call arable land? Yes, that's the first phase of my questions. What percentage of Kenya is arable?
Actually, if you take, we say less than half of our country is arable. So what does that mean? It means we have, in less than half of this country, we have predictive weather rainfall. We have good soils which is not too acidic or too alkaline, so it can sustain crop production. So it means we are even in under pressure because if half of our country is arable, only arable, that means we have to claim more land. We can always get the rest half into to become arable, but of course that requires a lot of investment because we have to look at what investments needs to happen. So to answer your question, we can say just half. If you compare with our neighbors, Tanzania, almost 90% of their land is arable, and their their land mass is double our country. So considering the peers in our region, we are also under pressure in terms of arable land.
See, the question I really wanted to ask, and why I asked this question first was, when you talk about soil health, what are you doing with areas of our country that are considered to be semi-arid or arid? Does this technology also cater for this sort of land to convert it from being what it is to make it arable?
So if I answer your question on the soil health, so when we mean soil health, so it means how is your soil? That is the structure. Is it able to hold the crops? That's number one. We look at acidity. More than 50% of also the arable land is acidic in Kenya. So what does that mean? It means if a farmer gets a right seed and gets also a right fertilizer, still in an acidic soil, they will not be able to achieve the potential of their productivity. So that is why soil health is important. And what we are doing is, first of all, help the farmer to do a soil analysis. 90% of the farmers don't do that. I think it's mainly the commercial farms. This is the narrative we are driving now for farmers to be able to do their soil analysis. They exactly know what their soils need, because as much as it's like a recommendation from the doctor, they have to do diagnosis and then do that. So it's like a diagnosis in this sector, and we have tools that we are using around that, and we have partners working to ensure that we know the soils and give that recommendation. But also, the disadvantage that has been happening is that the recommendation that has been going to the farmer in terms of fertilizers has been too acidifying fertilizers. In crops like rice, just to give you an example, farmers in Mwea and in the western part, that is the West Kano, Ahero, and all that, these farmers have been using very acidifying fertilizers. So what happens is that over time, your soil becomes too acidic, and it can never actually produce. So we are actually eliminating even what was even less in the arable land. So what we are addressing with our technologies is that we introduce less acidifying fertilizers and do a recommendation based on soil analysis, which comes with soil amendments like lime, which can change the soils back into neutral position that can be able to address these solutions. So these are the kind of things we are working on, but we have to address the issue of the soil health. Going to your question specifically on the drier areas, I think we have not even done enough in the quick wins, which is the more breadbasket regions. We talk about Western Kenya, Southern Nyanza, we talk about Central Rift, and even the North Rift, which is a breadbasket. A lot still needs to be done. First of all, to change simple technologies like crop rotation, but also look at the soil health and give better recommendations for the farmers, because as much as they're investing in the wrong inputs, what happens is that the return on investment for the farmers is poor, and that's why you hear that farmers complain that the output prices like maize prices is low, always output prices is never in a control of the farmers. Why? Because as long as you're producing suboptimally, it will be very difficult to even negotiate for a big to get a better price. And in that case, a farmer will always feel that the input prices are high. But when we change the narrative to increase productivity, the cost by unit area of production goes down, and we are able to drive that angle.
You know, William, as I listen to you,
up on your question, maybe on the dry area.
Yes.
If I can just comment now on the dry area, because
go ahead.
If you move to that side now, I would compare this to Israel. As we all know, it's a very dry area. Their system is just basically irrigation, and they export the food. So these dry areas requires a different approach, which is more new technologies around irrigation and ensuring that water availability to stimulate crop productivity. So that is the kind of narrative that needs to happen around the dry areas. But first of all is to build the foundation about soil health, so that that is the first base to propel the growth.
Soil health. As I listen to you, William, I'm feeling that the job that you're trying to do is a job that used to be done before the structural adjustment programs by the extension officers. From where you sit, do we have enough being done, especially to create awareness to the farmers, from even what you started by saying, building that competence, letting the farmers know this is what needs to happen, to teach the farmers this is how you can maximize your agriculture? This requires extension officers. What do we do to bridge that gap?
So in terms of extension, there is a gap. I must underline that. There is a big gap. And of course, it's the role of the government. And as you know, the agriculture now is a devolved unit. So in extension, actually, it's the role of the county governments for extension. But of course, it's a big gap. We've tried to work with the majority of the counties, but the ratio of extension officers, of course, to the farmers is really quite high. And that is why the thinking is we need to move our systems. And I believe government should be working on this angle. They need to work away from analog systems into digital systems. Yeah. Because one extension officer in the district, they will run the whole month without actually delivering key services to the farmers. So I think the systems needs to change into digital. What we are doing on our side as a private sector, of course, we are not able to bridge that gap because the government has to invest in that. But in terms of building our market, is looking at digital systems where we are able to communicate to our systems, to our farmers. And this is a club, of course, now that we are onboarded almost 1 million farmers now in our platform, and they get real-time information. They can call, they can get advisory on how to grow the crop. On a broader scale, this is something I believe the government should be doing on a broader scale in order to, of course, because it's not only about fertilizer, seed, and all that. There will be other issues that, of course, need to be addressed around crop husbandry, legislations, and all that. And so, to answer your question, the systems need to move quickly into digital because we are already late in terms of moving the productivity scale.
William, I see this as a perfect opportunity for, I'm sure the lingo is PPPs, as partnerships between private sector and government. Just what you've said now. Obviously, you've seen what needs to happen, whether government is aware of it or not. You've also talked about the hurdle that government might face, private sector might face. So I see this as a perfect opportunity for the two to be able to come together to work on something which is vital for the entire country. It can't just be private sector working in silos, government working on its own. So if you have the wherewithal technologically, and then you have the wherewithal in terms of the majority of the population, don't you think there is that sweet spot where everybody can come together and work on this thing moving forward, as opposed to everybody working on their own?
Actually, you crack it on there because no institution can be able to change this kind of landscape we are talking about. It has to be a partnership. And if you look at the narrative around public-private partnership, that would be the angle that can change our agricultural sector. the off-takers, the buyers of the produce, what are the quality they need? Counties needs to work with private sector partners like ourselves to be able to drive that conversation around how do we achieve that productivity and quality level. A case in point, we launched something called Action Africa, where we, onboarded farmers and we able to deliver to them around 80,000 farmers in Kenya a donation of fertilizer as a COVID resilience contribution from our side. Out of that platform, what we are driving now is we want partners to join in, even the media to join in, so that we use that platform as Action Africa to be able to drive the conversation to millions and millions of farmers, off-takers, government agencies, non-government organizations, the donor community who are still funding a lot of money into the agricultural space, to be able to now drive a narrative around PPP. So it cracks onto what you're saying. This requires really a concerted effort. And these are the catalyst systems that we are also trying to put in place now with the counties, because agriculture is devolved, and working with those specific counties, we're looking at what is actually the right fertilizer for Western Kenya, for example. So we just launched last week a specific fertilizer for Western Kenya, which addresses the soil needs. Like Brian was saying, the soil health of that region, we know the mapping of the soils and all that. So this is an example of how a good public-private partnership can really work. What is important for Western? What are the needs there? What are the unique challenges there? We are able to address that. But of course, this needs to be catalyzed quite a lot.
A lot of innovation is required, and organizations such as yours are actually playing, this role. What kind of support do you get from government? We know the Ministry of Agriculture is up there with policy. The county governments are the ones that are handling devolution on the ground. But you, as one organization that is dealing with just agriculture as one input, others are dealing with mechanization, others are dealing with other inputs as well. What kind of support do you receive so far? Not what you require, but what kind of support are you currently receiving from government at both levels, and what would then be the requirements going forward so that all this can work best?
In terms of support is around the logistics front. I know there was a lot of issues in 2020. It's a very unique year around COVID. There was a lot of disruptions on the logistics. But actually, government stepped up through the Ministry of Agriculture and ensure that things are flowing in the agricultural space, because we all need food to be on the table by all means.
Yeah.
But if you look also at the other support that we see from the government is the aggregation. They are running now a digital system on the e-voucher, where now they are moved from the traditional system where a government entity would deliver, and then maybe fertilizer or seed will get lost along the way before reaching the farmer.
Yep.
So the kind of approach they are going now is really good, because it's empowering the private sector to drive the implementation of the subsidy program, which is actually participatory. It's not free stuff to the farmer, because a serious farmer invests and a contribution from the government. This is the kind of catalyst I think can really change the narrative. And this system has been done very well in Rwanda. And by the way, Rwanda is actually producing, total productivity factor for Rwanda is quite high than us. Same to Tanzania. So, and this is a system they have used before. So what we see from the ministry now is very good, because you're driving into the private sector. And private sector then allows for competition. When there's competition, then the consumer, the farmer, is able now to get the quality service and across the sector, whether it's a technology, whether it's an input, whether it is in the market front. And I think this is the strongest support I can see now moving that. I hope it becomes more sustained. But there are still opportunities around partnership there, as you asked, Brian, because the extension officers, I feel, is still understaffed. So that needs to really be an area that can an opportunity for growth in the public space.
Thank you very much, William. As we conclude the conversation, people who would like to get into that database of yours, you're saying you have about 1 million or so farmers. If there's a farmer who's listening and they are not receiving this useful information from you, how would they be able to engage with you?
So soon we will be broadcasting it. So what happened? We have already 1 million farmers registered on the platform. What we are doing now is actually onboarding into applications. So soon, by next month, we should be able to communicate afresh to the farmers who want to join. So it's already temporarily closed, and because we have to run the pilot, it's done now. So soon we will be moving fast now to open to the broad mass, and I will tell the farmers to be keen. They will be get information through our channels and also through your media sources on how they can register and benefit from this. But my key message to them is, look, we have opportunities around soil health. They can walk to the nearest distributor across the country and ask about YARA offers around soil health and all that, and they can be able to get the tools to be able to work on that. And then all across, we have also toll-free lines which they have access to call for information apart from the digital system.
Interesting conversations there, and of course, you can count on us, be your partners, on disseminating this information and engaging further and further on what needs to be done to improve our productivity and get to a point where we can talk about food security in the country and competitiveness in our agriculture.
Yes, I think media really plays a key role around this because, as I said before, we are late. So we would like to partner with you, and it's good sign that it actually shows like this is what is very important, because then we can be able to address these nitty-gritties around what needs to be done now and move really fast. So partnering with you is a very good venture, that we can have programs that can reach to the masses in this century.
Yep. William Ngeno, Country Manager, YARA Kenya, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. We'll hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.